Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 147 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I just returned home to Lander from my 3-week loop, and my voice is slowly but surely recovering. You can probably hear some of the gravelly still in there. It's getting there, and I'm feeling good, and I've got a million things to do. And at least 999,000 of them I'm excited about. So yeah, some of it's grunt work. That's just the way it goes. But I'm excited about the things that are coming. First off, we have 2 open spots for our Empowered seminar this December at Crux Conditioning in Chattanooga. If you haven't heard the episode about Empowered and you think you might be interested, go listen to it. It's a seminar for the self-coached climber, and we are essentially helping you come up with a plan, a better plan, how to decide what to work on, and how to fit that into your busy schedules. And all of our coaches will be in attendance, as well as our data analyst, Dale, to talk about your assessment results and to, again, help you all build a better plan for yourself long term. So if you're interested, there are links right there in your pocket supercomputer in the show notes. Go to those, get registered. Next announcement, we've already announced the next Performance Climbing Coach Seminar. It's going to be in Ottawa, Canada. So if you're interested, especially after listening to this episode, which is with one of my colleagues for the Performance Climbing Coach Seminar, then you should go get registered now. Early bird pricing is available. That's at performanceclimbingcoach.com, or you can find a link right there in your pocket supercomputer in the show notes. All right, today's guest, who many of you have been waiting patiently for, some of you impatiently, is Dr. Tyler Nelson from Camp for Human Performance. Tyler is a good friend of mine and one of my colleagues at the Performance Climbing Coach Seminar, and he's built this incredible, excited following on the social media based around the data collection and looking at research and applying it to climbing. So it's largely a science-based approach to training for climbing. And I think it's massively valuable. He's done several episodes over on Training Beta with another colleague of mine, Neely Quinn, and there's some really great info in those, so you should go check those out. But the reason I wanted to talk to Tyler specifically was to provide some context into what he's doing, how he's using it, when he's using it. He gets so excited that he puts so many things out there and people eat it up, as they should. But not having context can lead to, at best, not using the protocols, the exercises in a useful way. And at worst, I feel as if not having context for how, when, why you should use a specific exercise or protocol can be harmful. So I really value having that context, and I wanted to provide it for all of you. Of course, we get into a few other things as well. We discuss ways that you can look through the research, ways that you can parse out the better information and understand what it is that you're looking at. We also go into some of the more well-established research around tendons and what that means for you and how to use that research. Now, one thing I just want to keep in mind here is that pretty much all of the tendon research has been done on patellar tendons or, more common injuries for people. Almost nothing on climbing and finger tendons or elbows specific to climbers anyway. So there is, some level of guessing when we are applying that research over to climbers. And does that mean you shouldn't do it? No, not at all. That's not at all what it means. It just means that the science isn't saying this is how it works for climbers. We as coaches are taking that information and then making educated guesses on how we believe that will affect us. So basically, you have to take it all with at least a small grain of salt. Tyler and I recorded this episode while sitting at the Donut Distillery in Nashville, Tennessee. So big thanks to the Donut Distillery for having us. And if you're a donut connoisseur like we are, those mini donuts at the Donut Distillery are amazing. Go do it. You'll thank me, I promise. One last order of business before we get into this. There was a winner on the Instagram. We chose a winner who gets the Tyler Nelson Training TNT Donut shirt. You'll get a 12-pack of donuts from your local spot. You'll also get a pack of circuit tape from us, as well as our sticker pack, including our donut sticker. And you will learn who you are at the end of the show. So listen through, and I will talk to you on the other side. Let's get into this.
I think there's enough science to be of interest. It's certainly worth trying out, and I don't know, again, there's not really a downside, so try things and see how they respond, and then wait for science to catch up.
This time to build power. This time to build power. This time
Cream usually freaks me out like that, but on a tiny little donut, I think I can do it.
Looks less intimidating. And I can just chop.
All right, so we're sitting here at the Donut Distillery in Nashville. Tyler went on a donut shop searching rampage trying to find the best one. And this one has not only donuts and coffee, but also beer, craft beers. So we might just be here the entire day. We don't even have to leave.
In the bathroom, there was an advertisement that says, buy a beer, get a 3-pack of donuts for free.
Oh, shit.
4 p.m. to 7 p.m., that's the happy hour special.
This is either the best place to drink or the worst place to drink. I'm not sure which.
Either way, if you're passing through East Nashville, it's worth checking out.
We're going to sit here and eat donuts and talk about climbing harder. I don't know if the two go hand in hand, but I don't know that they're exclusive either.
Definitely not exclusive.
So you've been doing tons of, first off, you read a ridiculous amount of research. I can't even fucking fathom how you get through all the research that you read.
I do. I had a professor in graduate school, and the one thing about research is you can really get away with not having to read all the fine details of every single research paper. A lot of times I will go on PubMed and search for topics that I'm interested in and look at the abstracts. And this professor always said, you can, if you want to get a general idea of a concept, you can just read abstracts and you get a really good overall idea of what people are interested in. So sometimes I'll do that, but I'll really narrow it down to review papers, which are definitely the most relevant and the most comprehensive.
So reviewing other studies.
Yeah, systematic review papers are experts in the field, and the experts will go through and they will collect all papers on a topic, and they'll read the methods and make sure they're actually of good quality, and then they'll take the ones that are good and they will read those papers and they will make a statement about all of the papers that are relevant, and then they'll get rid of all the garbage. So it really does all the work for you.
Yeah, that's smart. When there are people who are doing these systematic review papers, do you look for things that are relevant to just rock climbing, or are you looking for mostly tendon stuff? How do you decide what you're going to dig into deeper?
Just really depends on what I'm interested in. There's not a lot of systematic reviews on rock climbing specifically, but things that are relevant to our sport that I'm interested in, like tendon health and loading, is one of those things. Concentric, eccentric, and isometric types of muscle contractions are another relevant thing that's useful for training. Stretching is one that I'm interested in learning, about and teaching people about, just because that's very misunderstood. So in general, I try and find ones that are maybe not understood very well to talk about, to teach people about more so, because people understand the relevance of concentric movements like deadlifting and pull-ups and all those normal movements, but
right.
People don't really understand how to use isometrics as and that's kind of what I've been on lately, interested in. But eccentrics as well are very misunderstood.
Yeah, they kind of became really popular in like the late 90s or something like that.
And it's always changing too. Science is always changing, and so the new systematic review papers on eccentrics are incredibly enlightening for any sports application. So it's using that information and trying to morph it into something that climbers can use too. Trying new things just gives us new ideas.
Yeah, you mentioned that there aren't many climbing papers or systematic reviews on climbing. And one of the beefs I've had with climbing research, I'm also discovering, is a beef that I have with quite a bit of research that's out there. And I guess it's a necessary thing, but when the N is so small, like a lot of climbing papers might have an N of 7 or something, and I'm seeing a lot bigger studies that are done with just like an N of 12 or something like that. So does it matter? Do you look at how big the study was? And are there any big studies on this type of stuff?
There's not necessarily on climbing per se. Some of the retrospective papers that Volker, Schoeffel has done, and those guys have big cohorts of data where they use large groups of people and then make estimates on them, but they're not real randomized controlled trials necessarily.
Right.
But any systematic review paper that you read will do that for you, and they will pick out the ones with the larger sample size, and they will try and make their best statement on those papers that have a good sample size. So that's kind of why I always tell people in the courses that I teach, like, go to systematic reviews. If you're not familiar with the topic and you really want to learn about it, don't just search tendon health or stretching and performance on Google Scholar. You're going to find something that supports what you think.
Right.
And it's really easy to say, oh, this is a study says exactly what I want. This is great. But that could, unless you have the skill set and knowledge base to really go through and sift through the details.
Right.
You can find anything you want.
And patience.
Yeah, and time and patience to do it. And so the systematic reviews are a really good place to start. And you could even just read the abstract and the conclusion, and then some of the tables in the middle, and you could learn a ton of information about a topic.
Where are you finding these, and is there a better place than another to search for them?
I have a membership through the NSCA, so the Journal of Strength Conditioning Research is a pretty good journal in the States, and that one I pay for that membership. But there's all sorts of open access papers, which mean they're free. And so even using PubMed, you can limit your search to papers that are free.
Right.
So you can literally search for a topic, and it'll bring up papers that are open access.
And you just add systematic review into
and then there's also another bar where you can do review or systematic review, and that'll do the same thing. It'll narrow it down for you.
Cool. When you're looking through all these papers and the stuff you put on Instagram gets people really excited, and you're highlighting and underlining and trying to take things that you're seeing in these papers and add them into your training somehow. If you were to give me a percentage, and I know you're just making it up off the top of your head here, but how much do you underline, look at, but then not really put into use in the real world. So how much do you read that you actually use versus that doesn't really find its way into what you're doing?
Quite a bit, because I'm pretty comfortable with understanding these topics, like especially for tendons. Like I did my master's thesis on tendon health and rehab, so I know that literature pretty good and the concept's pretty good. So when I read new things that I talk about, I usually change what I do pretty regularly. Like the whole stiffness protocol that I was talking about last week or the week before was a new paper that I found on adolescents talking about how to train tendon stiffness. And it wasn't for finger tendons necessarily, but the same principle should apply as long as we, understand the physiology a little bit more,
Right.
So for me, my background's a little different than most people that will read a research paper and feel confident and comfortable just immediately starting to do it, I guess. But most of the time, I usually suggest the ones that I really think are impactful and can really help us change the way we train. I mean, and this was really simple, and it doesn't have to be a big change. This one was literally like a 3-second contraction, 3-second relaxation times 4, and then 2-minute rest, and then times 5. Do that 5 times. And the difference really is like the intensity and understanding the types of intensity that we need to apply when we're doing these new interventions. And that one was over 85%. So being able to target a percentage of a maximum contraction and then the actual time under tension relaxation, is how we can do new things in the future for climbing, and try new things. And then someone will be interested to study it, and then we'll do studies on it, kind of thing, So in general, I think research is kind of created by practitioners in the field trying new things, that seem relevant. And then people are like, oh, we should study that. So
yeah, that's kind of how I've felt about it for a while. And I've spent quite a bit of time trying to put together an episode that is kind of both a celebration and a warning about research, because it's very easy to, like you said, just try to find your hypothesis and prove it via paper. You could also just as easily find one that contradicts that one, So I've always felt like I don't want to say that the coaches are ahead of the game or that the practitioners are ahead of the game, but the researchers are generally studying things that the practitioners have found either works or doesn't, and they want to know why.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, usually the practitioners are, kind of creating more interest for researchers, to try new things and actually study it. But the tricky thing with research is it's really time consuming and it's really expensive. Like doing a big end study is massive time commitment.
Yeah.
And writing research grants for stuff like that requires a larger organization to actually throw money at it and care about it. Where in climbing, that will maybe change in the future in the States. In other countries, it's a little more so than here. But with the Olympics, maybe that stuff will start to come along. But having huge research papers is a gigantic undertaking.
Yeah.
So that's
totally.
why most of the research that I talk about isn't climbing. It's about larger things like ball sport athletes. Like most of the tendon research has been on the knee and the Achilles. And they're very different than the finger flexors, but they're made of the same material. We just have to be, kind of not timid, but we need to be more maybe selective with how we apply the same principles to climbing. But the only way we can do it is try and see what happens. I usually try all this stuff on myself before to make sure it seems applicable and I'm not going to hurt someone. But
Yeah, totally. And, I think it's really easy and this is something I try to be really careful of, but it's hard to put something on Instagram that you're excited about and then have people, it's very easy to take that stuff out of context, And do you worry about that when you're putting all this stuff online at all, that people are going to take it out of context? Or are you just pretty sure that most of it's safe anyway and at least just as good as what we're already doing? So
yeah, most of it should be equal in terms of its intensity and risk, but just a slight maybe variation on either the velocity or the intensity or The other thing recently that I've been talking about is like these long duration isometrics to failure.
Right.
Like climbers do that all the time on
Right.
the wall, only you're actually slapping for a hold, so you're adding velocity into it. So that's more risky than hanging on to something statically. And people have tried this before. I know lots of climbers that have done really long extended hangboard routines.
Yep, totally.
And doing it because they maybe saw a benefit from it, but maybe not understanding why it would be beneficial.
Yep.
So for me, interested for me is my background is like very, biological and physiological in that sense, where we can really understand why you would do that. And it actually makes quite a bit of sense in some contexts. So trying to maybe shed light on why we do things that we've done before and
Yep.
maybe bring those back seems relevant.
Yeah, and I think, I hear a lot of people, everybody has their own bias about what works, what doesn't, what's dangerous, what's not. And I hear lots of people complain isn't necessarily the right word, but caution against a lot of the training protocols that frankly are safer than just getting on a steep woody and pulling on little plastic crimps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Climbing, because of exactly what you just said, there's all this intensity, we're adding in all this velocity, and it's, a pretty uncontrolled movement a lot of the time. We're not even exactly sure what position our body's going to end up in, and we're just trying really hard, pulling on holds that are flexing, on wood that's flexing, jumping to these things. That's way less safe than hangboarding or isometric lock-offs or almost any of the stuff that any of us are showing on our Instagrams.
Yeah. Absolutely, for sure. Climbing, even from just the last couple weeks, the temperature's been good in Salt Lake. Outside bouldering, my shoulders both are sore as hell.
Yeah.
And I've been doing tons of training, and my shoulders have not been sore at all. It takes a couple days trying super hard outside, getting excited. Not even that many attempts on a movement, but you're just the excitement level is higher. You try harder. There's the velocity component, right? We can definitely and do exert more maximum force when we're climbing on a project because of all those factors. So the training component, really is just in my opinion, a preparation of your tissues for being able to try harder outside. Is kind of what I view training as. Just a way to make your tissues tolerant of high levels of force. So then when you go do it outside, your potential for injury is much lower.
Yep. Are there any cautions that you use against looking at specific research? Are there things you steer clear of just because of your experience with it?
I think anything that's in a review paper, I think is totally worth reading, as long as it's relevant to the sport. I don't we've already mentioned small sample sizes. Small N's are no bueno. That's not really worth it. If you find something that supports what you think right away, then you want to find the opposite. Which is great about the review papers because they'll do that for you. I really can't emphasize people enough to read those. And some of them you have access to and some don't, but most good review papers will be open access. So yeah, I usually caution people from finding too many things that support what they already believe. I'm trying to challenge that a little bit, which is really hard to do. It's hard for me to do even.
Yeah, I like the idea of these review papers for that reason.
Yeah.
Because you're not going out there with your hypothesis in mind.
Yeah.
And saying, I just want to prove this,
Yeah.
Or I want to see proof of this.
If there's a good review paper or multiple review papers on a topic, like on isometrics, there's 3 or 4 really good ones. And what they say in those papers, if they're supportive of that type of intervention, then it's not bullshit for sure. Maybe
Right.
it's not as specific as we want for a specific sport, but it's definitely not bullshit. Where if you search something like I always do this kind of as a joke on voodoo flossing. There's zero research on that kind of stuff.
Right.
So when people ask me about it, I'm like, I don't really know anything about it because there's no good platform for me to read about it because I have no idea. Someone just made that shit up.
Right.
So those I usually caution away from things like that and lean people into things that have at least been studied that researchers care about.
Yeah, and I appreciate that approach. I tend toward more of a I also pay pretty close attention to the anecdotal interventions that people are coming up with, using, deciding that they work, whatever. And while voodoo floss has never really done anything for me, I know lots of people who swear by it. So I'm like, if you're feeling like it works for you and it's helping, then continue to do it. And I've heard you say similar things, like if it seems to be working, keep doing it.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's no reason, if something's inexpensive and you can apply it to yourself and it doesn't rely you to be dependent on someone else in a therapeutic context, totally useful in my opinion.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to like giving an opinion about it as an intervention, like the real answer is I really don't know if it's helpful or not. It could be for some people, could be for not. Like I got one of those crazy rings at the climbing symposium they gave us, the little whatever roll rings, acupuncture rings, and I played with that thing like it was going out of style.
Yeah, they feel great.
I loved it. I was just
feel great.
rolling it around. People are like, what does that thing do? I was like, it could have some effect on blood flow. It definitely changes sensory perception, which could be argued as really helpful for pain complaints. Same thing with flossing. So, I think there's lots of, things that people can do that I don't think are useless by any means, that, but there's not a lot of reason to believe that they're doing a whole lot either.
Right.
So.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it's smart that you take that approach, and I appreciate that you take that approach. And it's not a very just hard-nosed, like, I'm going to wait until research shows that it's effective to acknowledge that it might be effective.
Yeah, sure. Well, people think that just because my Instagram account's like so much about isometrics, they're like, do you do anything else? I was like, sure, I do everything that everyone else does, but these are the things that people don't understand very well,
right,
that I think are maybe another like addition to an already like, knowledge base that people have, that coaches have. Everyone knows how to do a weighted pull-up and knows what the benefits of a concentric weighted pull-up would be. But are the outcomes of high intensity or long duration one arm isometric to failure the same? Are they different? Like, and then trying those things out. I would argue in a lot of contexts they would produce the exact same outcome.
Sure.
With a different type of stimulus. So having that variation is always so important for people, and having lots of options is great because there's so many ways to get to the exact same goal and outcome, and having more tools is never a bad thing.
Yeah, totally. And, as somebody who's training people and suggesting things to people, I appreciate seeing that stuff because it gives me a different risk factor involved in the exercises. That, if this portion of the pull up is aggravating your shoulder or aggravating your elbow or whatever, but this portion isn't, then let's work in this, smaller range, or let's do isometrics, or whatever. So I'm able to take all of those things into account and decide what's best for that individual climber, and that's where I think it's super important. You just said that you do all of the other things too, and then you're experimenting with this stuff and playing with this stuff. What do you, again, I'm going to ask for a percentage off the top of your head, but how much of your Instagram, what percentage of your training shows up on there?
A lot.
Okay.
For me personally.
Yep.
Yeah. For me personally. Because I've done lots of the other things throughout my whole life, like I'm more interested in applying these new things and trying them on myself to see how they work out. And really the latest thing that I've been really interested in is trying to make things as simple as possible. I probably do 10 consults a week from all over the world for people with elbow and shoulder pain. Right. And like I can make usually, above 80% of people feel really good and get out of pain by doing bar isometrics, and that's not like my great idea. That's like science would support that, and the rehab literature suggests that doing very controlled, which feel safe, which you can control the tension, types of muscle contractions are really good for the tendon. They're really good for pain, all these things. But making it as simple as possible. So, because rehab can be a real pain in the ass, and there's lots of crazy things that people do that require you to know how to do all these new movements, where literally for climbers, if you hold your arm over your head, it's very specific to how we perform our sport. We can use a bar which everyone has access to at their house or their work or their gym, and then we can control those variables by either trying really hard, holding on for a really long time, or increasing the velocity, right? Just be really simple, and it works really well. And so for me, and I, have been going through this over the summer, doing all these interventions on myself to see the outcome, and I've been really impressed with the outcome for myself too, and have been feeling really healthy too. So I haven't, because I've definitely done weighted pull-ups with really high weight, and it always makes my elbows sore.
Right.
So I've been able to have a really long training cycle at 37 without getting hurt, which is great. Which.
Yeah, let's dig into the tendon stuff a little bit, because I've been following along a little bit with the research, and I assume that your sources are probably the same as mine. You've probably got a lot more, and I know a lot of the stuff you've been doing comes directly from like Keith Barr or Ebony Rio, Jill Cook, I think.
Yep.
So those studies that they're doing, and I think this stuff is super interesting, and I'd love to find a way to really distill it down, make it simple for people to understand why to use which protocols, why to use which interventions. Just because like on the Instagram, it's tough to take in all the information and understand its context.
For sure. And Instagram is interesting like that. It's good that you bring that up, because it's hard to get a comprehensive picture of something, especially because my brain is pretty sporadic, and I'll be reading something and say, cool, we're going to try this today, right? And so there's not like a source usually for all of it.
Well, you can put all of these things together in your head. Your brain moves so damned fast that you can put all these things together, and then you put it out as one video, and people are automatically like, this is the golden egg right here. This is everything I need to do. All I'm going to do from now until I go to my project are 90 and 120 degree isometrics.
Yeah, don't do that, people.
So I just want to put it all into context, because I think it's really, really useful advice. So I just want people to understand where and when it's useful.
Well, the really cool thing about using and understanding the principles, why I'm such a fan of that, is you can apply them to lots of different things. Like you could apply the same principles to your fingers that you would your elbows, that you would your shoulders, that you would your knee, right? In terms of getting high amounts of muscle recruitment, getting either really long duration stretch to the tendon or really high force on the tendon, or really dynamic and high velocity movement to the muscle. And so those are the three things that we really need in our sport, in any sport, to make a healthy tendon.
Yeah.
And the exact same thing applies. Either you're going to try a really, really high intensity maximum effort, which would be considered an overcoming isometric, which would be a short duration, maybe 3 to 5 seconds. But
and that's where the object you're pushing or pulling against doesn't move.
Doesn't move, yep.
You're just trying as hard as you can to move it.
Just trying as hard as you can, yep. And so you just pull as hard as you can. And so in that case, you're getting a little bit of stiffness into the tendon, but you're getting a lot of recruitment in the muscles. When we hold on to something, if we're on our fingers or on a bar and we're hanging to failure, as long as you possibly can, your tendon stretches the whole entire time, but the muscle shortens the whole entire time too. So that also is good for recruitment, but that's really good for your tendon density, because the individual fibers in your tendon slide next to each other, these little units called fascicles, and then they break apart their bonds, and then they grow back stronger.
Right. So that's when we're doing long duration things, we're breaking cross links.
Yeah, you break the cross links, and then hopefully, as long as you get enough rest and water and nutrition, they grow back stronger, and they'll create more bonds, right? And so kids that have been climbing their whole life have way more dense tendons than someone like myself that started climbing at 20.
Right.
So that's kind of a very slow, long-term goal of any athlete in any tendon, to get density in their tendon.
Right. So if doing these long duration hangs builds density, breaks down the cross links, the idea is to make them grow back stronger. But these short, higher velocity hangs create more cross links. Is that right? And they stiffen the tendon.
Yep.
Why use one over the other? Because they both sound like they're making you stronger.
Right.
Why would I choose to do the short duration hangs versus the long duration hangs?
The long duration hangs have more tensile load in terms of percentage than the high intensity ones would, just because of the time. Because you think of like a 5-second versus a 30-second movement. During the 30-second, you can guarantee that you're using the whole tendon. Or during the 5-second, you might be using 90%, 80% of the tendon, maybe not the whole thing. Where if we hang to failure, one of the things that's been studied is you can show that they're loading the whole tendon. And so there's this principle called hysteresis, where you stretch a tendon, and then as you stretch it, it slowly just like gets longer and longer and longer. And when we do it with a high intensity, we don't get as much stretch on the tendon. So getting that stretch is really relevant for making sure we comprehensively engage the whole tendon. And you also engage like all of the motor units too. Like it's very much like BFR almost when you hang to failure, because you go through the whole motor unit pool as you hang on, because they asynchronously contract, and then eventually they're all fatigued. So you're using even the small and the large ones during a movement.
So why do the short duration hangs at all? If this is recruiting all the motor units, if this is, working the entire tendon, why would we do the short duration hangs?
Because it's more like a sport where you don't have as much time to hang on, right? You can't hang on for 30 seconds before you do another move. You have to train the tendon and the muscles to recruit together more efficiently. So in terms of like a rehab, a good example for a rehab setting is, let's say you have 10% of your tissue injured, 10% of your tendon. When you grab on and you pull really high intensity, there's no guarantee that you're not going to use that small 10% that's injured during that movement. Or if you're doing like something higher velocity, there's no guarantee. It's maybe likely you will. But if you're doing a slow controlled isometric, you can be pretty sure that you're going to use 90% of the healthy tissue. So in that context, you would use a longer duration one because you're using more of your total tendon capacity.
Right.
And so the same principle would apply with the strength training. But density is really good for like the health overall of your tendons. And then you also want to that's why none of those are perfect by themselves, and you need to train the muscle tendon unit to be stiff and function together. And that's what a recruitment one would be like.
Okay. Something you just said snapped a light bulb on in my head. I remember reading, and tell me if this is your understanding as well, I think it was Keith Barr talking about if your tendon has a damaged spot, essentially the way tendons work is they can distribute the load around that spot. Sort of like, I think he described it as putting a rock in a river and then the water just flows around it. So the load will distribute around the injured spot. So what you're saying is those short duration loads potentially can just distribute around the injury and make no difference with it. Whereas if you do these long duration hangs, you're far more likely to target the injured spot and load it, which is what tendons like. They want to be loaded.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons we do the long duration hangs for rehab purposes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because you want to, the only way we can tell the tendon what to do, so to speak, is to get the load either of moderate. And so the science on the isometrics was a 40 to 70% MVIC, which is just the max voluntary isometric contraction percentage. If you take that to failure, then what we do is we change the shape of the cells that live between the individual collagen fibers, which signal to the immune system, back to the brain, that we need better anabolic response to try and, build healthier tendons. And so the science is pretty inconclusive if it's a central core tendon injury, if those ever heal or not.
Right.
So even if they don't heal, then the best option we have is to maintain the health of the remaining tendon that's not injured.
Sure.
So either way, And I was just reading a paper yesterday or the day before on biologics, on stem cell injections for tendons, because those seem very promising and very cool and very high tech, and they are definitely not better than loading a tendon.
Right.
And the other thing that's so cool about tendons is like there's tons of protocols. When I was in graduate school, the Alfredson protocol was the best, and that was the eccentric load protocol. Right. But now the heavy resistance.
And that's what kind of became popular in the 90s.
And so everyone says, my elbow hurts, I'm doing eccentrics. And I say, great. The one thing that eccentrics, isometrics, and heavy resistance tendon loading protocols all have that are the same is the intensity. All of them have a high intensity. So it doesn't really matter how you do it. It's really just an intensity thing. So when it comes to like doing the eccentrics, I did that in grad school. It's a huge pain in the ass to like set up and do an eccentric only and then let go and then set up an eccentric. So the bar, using the isometrics on the bar is just so much more simple, is why I kind of cater towards that more than other protocols.
Sure. So,
but one's not necessarily better than the other, I wouldn't say at the start,
eccentrics versus isometrics, you're
versus
saying.
Heavy resistance, and then you can, unless it's like talking about an injured client and with pain, then usually the isometrics are pretty good.
That's what I was just going to say. The Ebony Rio studies talking about pain inhibition and isometrics, I think are super interesting because a lot of climbers, a lot of my clients will judge how injured they are and whether they can continue climbing based on their pain level, which we already know is a wildly incorrect measure of what the injury actually is. So if I can have them do an isometric protocol and that reduces their pain, then that's a big win, number one, because I get to have them continue training, and tendons like load, so I'm going to be able to help their injured tendon if I can get that pain response down a little bit. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's why people, at least in my clinic, Onsite, my advice is they hurt, right? And that's why people spend money to go to physical therapy or any sort of interventions. They want to hurt less, right? But the reality is they want healthy tissues long term. But if people are paying you money to give them advice, right, they want to hurt less too. And so, the isometrics have been shown to make people have more pain inhibition, which is great. And then that's just kind of icing on the cake to get them to load. But the exact like timing for the pain inhibition too is like the 24-hour cycle.
Right.
So like every morning it should feel a little better.
Based on the next day, how it feels the next day.
The next day in the morning before you load it. Because loading, you can do anything to inhibit people's pain. That's why there's so many options out there for therapies. Like you could, you could eat donuts and have less pain.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that eating donuts really, it really doesn't.
Maybe too often.
It doesn't mean that it's really literally doing that. But so I always like to educate people about that and then have them think really long term. And then the bar stuff works too, because like using the flashboard outside or some sort of portable, tool at the crag, like it's another way that you can just warm up your tendons really fast,
Yep. So back to if you've got an injured client, I just kind of want to lay this out in a linear way here. If you've got a client that comes in with a tendon injury, correct me if I'm wrong here, if I miss a step here, but what you might do first, well, actually, tell me what you do first in a clinical setting. Which one was that? The pink one?
Donut.
Okay.
We haven't even been talking about these donuts,
I know,
which is too bad.
the donut that's been my favorite so far, these are little mini gourmet donuts, and they're amazing because they're just bite size. I think my favorite so far was the cream that scared me in the beginning.
Yeah, it was really good.
That was good.
Yeah, it really was good. This one is really exciting. It's very, very fruity, but very sugary. The pink one.
Okay, that one's fruity too. The one with the orange.
Yeah, I think it must be the frosting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been sitting here enjoying these and haven't even given the listeners.
Yeah.
A
So if
chance
you hear
I
us,
think that's just a regular glaze, maybe.
If you hear us chewing and smacking our lips, that's why.
Sorry.
Got a little plate of tiny donuts here.
So it's like, to answer that question, it depends on the location. If we say elbow injury.
Let's say elbow.
Okay, because we've been talking about that. it depends on what they've been doing, how much rest they've actually taken. Because the one thing that is good to bring up here is most people, when they get an injury, they say, all I've done is I've really taken back the intensity and I've increased the volume, which is what science would say is the exact opposite of what you want to do.
That's the opposite of what tendons want to do.
So most of the time I'm like, that you want to do the opposite of that. So if it's a route climber that's like, now I'm only climbing, I'm doing only arc training, or I'm only doing tons of easy stuff, that's actually less helpful than if you were to go back bouldering. So I usually have them go do like on-site level bouldering.
Well, can I just clarify that really quick?
Yeah.
Because if I'm correct, one of the things that tendons really don't like is velocity.
Yeah.
Especially when they're injured. So would bouldering actually be more helpful, assuming that it's, versus easy sport climbing or long arc sessions, it's more velocity?
That's why I have people do like the on-site level. Definitely not limit bouldering or project bouldering, where they're trying hard, but like 80%. Like, I mean, you could climb, V5 pretty easily and controlled without a lot of velocity.
Unless it's on a moon board.
Yeah. So unless it's on the moon board. So finding an intensity they can still climb that doesn't require them to do lots of big dynamic moves. And I definitely tell people, avoid dynamic moves and avoid latching on very quickly.
Yeah.
But you can still climb, because taking someone out of their sport emotionally and psychologically is really stressful, and that tends to be worse on pain, and it's really not worse on the tendon. Tendons are performance limiting injuries. They're not season ending injuries for the most part, unless maybe it's a pulley. So people will notice a performance deficit more than they will notice that they can't do stuff. So having them do a little bit makes a lot of sense, and then educating them why they're doing that also makes a lot of sense. Because lots of low volume climbing just dehydrates their tendons, and it's not enough load to really make a change on the cellular level, so it's just not worth doing in general. And then I'll have them, depending on whether they've taken time off or if they've been climbing on it still, each case is so different. But then we'll, get them on some sort of loading program where they can, do it frequently, because the general consensus is high intensity, high frequency. And so you can get the intensity in a bunch of different ways that we've talked about a little bit already, and then just kind of start programming from there.
Okay. And when we're looking to load the injured tendon, we already talked about tendons don't like velocity. They also don't like compressive loads, right? Mm-hmm. So we're looking to lengthen the tendon while we're loading it. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, you can lengthen the tendon while you're loading it, or you can just load it at a long muscle length as well.
Okay.
So in the elbow, you could, and up front, you could start with loading it slowly, like on the bar. If your chin's over the bar and you're loading eccentrically into extension.
Yeah.
Or you could just do a long muscle length at 120 to 140 degrees and either hang to failure or try and pull hard from that position. That works as well. That tends to be more pain inhibitory than the lowering modality. But yeah, it's starting to load it like right away. And the other reason why I think the pull-up bar works good is most people can do it multiple times per day. You know, there's a lot of reason to think that you could do it every couple hours. You could do a couple hangs, and that would be okay for your tissue.
Yeah.
You know, and it's something that's really available that you can just grab onto something and lift your feet off the ground, you know, instead of having to go to the gym.
Yeah, that's something I've been using myself quite a bit. My elbow has been bugging me from chopping wood. Mm-hmm. Just for whatever reason, swinging the heavy axe and chainsawing, and just wrecked my right elbow. But, and the pain is the worst part of it. Like it
hurts like shit.
Initially, it just hurts enough that it affects my performance. But if I warm up by doing some isometrics, the pain drops way down really quickly, and then I can try hard. Yeah. And I've discovered that there's some moves that will aggravate the tendon on the next day. Sadly, one of the moves on one of the things I've been working on, my elbow hates it. So when I try that problem, the next morning my elbow's like, what the fuck did you do?
Yeah.
But then there are other problems that are just as hard that don't aggravate it at all, and it feels better the next morning. Right. So
yeah, that's the exact same thing that's happened to me on that bouldering project I'm doing right now. hard, slopey compression move my shoulder does not like. So I usually warm up really good, and if I'm sore, I say, cool, I got 5 tries, and that's it. Like, you know, I got to get in and out as fast as I can. But when you talk about compression, the other thing I usually have people avoid if we're talking about
and
the
we're
elbow
not talking about, this is one of those weird situations where the same word is being used by the researchers, by the physiologists that we use to describe climbing. So it's not compression like compression climbing. This is putting a compressive load on the tendon, right? So like squeezing it, pushing it against the bone.
Yeah, pushing it against the bone. And the one thing that was going to bring up is I usually have people climb on 30 or 45 degree terrain if it's elbow thing, because one of the compressive positions is full flexion.
Right.
So like I usually have people get away from vertical climbing or slab climbing, because those always require lots of locking off.
Yep. So like the top of a pull-up.
Yeah, which makes people's tendons so damn sore. And so eventually, the other thing is you have to understand, and people do, that you need to work into doing those things eventually. But up front, there's no risk and there's no downside in not doing those things for a period of time until your tendon feels better. You know, you're not going to lose any strength or any range of motion or anything like that. You want to get your symptoms to subside and load your tendon in a non-painful position, then work back into velocity and compressive loads and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So we start, isometrics are kind of like the place to start.
It just makes sense, yeah.
Gets, inhibits some of the pain. And do we want to start with long isometrics if we have what we believe is a tendon injury? Start with those long isometrics? Is that the way to go?
That's usually what I suggest. Yeah, I'll usually suggest a couple different interventions. One would be a long duration, usually it's like a get used to loading with 2 arms on a bar.
Yep.
Like a couple sets of 5 seconds, warm up. The cool thing about the bar too is all you have to do is change the hand position on the bar, and therefore you change the muscle activation pattern at the elbow. So because it's really hard to know exactly which tendon might be aggravated in the elbow. So
are we looking for the position that aggravates it more?
No, not necessarily. I would do all 3 positions, like a prone grip, palms away, palms towards your face, and then palms towards each other.
Yeah.
Just because that kind of gets all the major muscles across the elbow flexor. Because again, when you have an injured tendon, you want all of the muscles to be used to being recruited. So then you have a larger pattern of movement options when you're loading, right? So then you have even more potential for having less pain because you have more muscles that are coordinating at the same time. And so I'll have them do a couple arm hangs to get warmed up really good, then try a couple 1-arm hangs. And then you can do some long duration hangs to failure with 2 arms or 1 arm, but it really depends on how much the athlete can, hang and tolerate that kind of stuff if it's an elbow thing.
Yeah, one of the things I don't like about the go to failure is that some climbers can only hold that position for 3 seconds. And I remember reading in the research, or maybe I heard Keith Barr say it somewhere, that 30 seconds is kind of a good time. It's where most of what we're looking for has already happened, and anything beyond that 30-second window roughly is just giving you really marginal gain.
Yeah, the last paper was 30 to 45s, but that range. But yeah, somewhere in that range. And so in that case, if someone can't hold 1 arm, they would do 2 arms for 30 to 45 seconds.
Yeah.
Usually the range I give her 20 to 40 seconds, all right.
And if we need to add assistance, a toe on somewhere, or...
Yep, that's fine. Or you can even just hang and load your feet on a wall, or stand and load into your tendon.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's a good point. The range, I think, was, it's always confusing to get the ranges, but I think it was like 40 to 70% or 30 to 70% MVIC, which is not very high, which is great, because that's kind of where I was thinking for the fingers. I was like, man, if we could train our fingers at 40% effort for 30 to 45 seconds, like that seems like a pretty good thing for the pulleys. So I've been trying that a lot on myself, and it's been pretty productive. I've been pretty excited about it in those positions that maybe are hard for people that are more stressful.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, as I look at the research, as I watch your suggestions, I see this pattern that looks a lot like how a lot of us are climbing anyway, like how we come up through climbing, where we're building up this density by hanging on a long time. We're trying to stay on the wall longer. That's kind of everybody's general first go-to when they want to get better at climbing. Like, I want to stay on the wall longer and longer and longer. And then they start moving into, I want to do harder moves and more explosive moves. And so it almost follows the right pattern in a lot of ways to strengthen your tendons in a really organic, healthy way for climbing to begin with.
Yeah, and like we've talked about already, people already have done a lot of these things, as you have too. It's just like, but now maybe understanding why is relevant, because then we can maybe understand when we wouldn't need an intervention or would include a different type of intervention, maybe to stay healthy, right? So we don't get, because the one thing that's so hard to know is when do you switch things up and when do you, because that's the downside of using a social platform to talk about new things is you get so many questions that are specific. And my answer is always like, when we went to that Ava Lopez thing, was like, I don't know you. Unless you want to talk on the phone, I really can't give you, my suggestions are very general and principle based, because like there's no way to know for each individual. So, that's why I've always been a fan of like trying to have as much principle education as it is like prescriptive stuff for people, which, it's hard to know.
Yeah, totally. So just what I want to do is maybe take a break. I'm going to get another coffee. We can eat a couple donuts. And then I want to come back and talk a little bit about the more recent research on collagen. Is it helpful? Is it not? What do we actually know about it? And not collagen, but supplementing your collagen. Obviously, collagen is helpful, but supplementing it, what that looks like and what we actually know and what we don't know. But before that, just really quick, while I've got people's ear, what this sort of linear idea of rehabbing a tendon should look like should be start with isometrics, get the pain down, slowly build up into tolerating more load and then more movement. Generally speaking, slower, more controlled movement, concentric, eccentric, and then moving into more plyometric, faster, dynamic movement as it can tolerate it.
Yep.
But resting it for a long period of time is there's usually not an option for any minor tendon injury.
Yeah, no, it's usually not that helpful.
Yeah.
And, this has been studied a ton in other sports in the knee, and the, ultrasounds would show that there's 15% degraded tissue maybe in a patellar tendon that's been aggravated for years.
Right.
But there's still 85% healthy tissue. So most of the time they're like, load the tissue.
Yep.
So in general, disuse is never a good strategy for collagen because it doesn't know what to do.
Yep.
Other than if you apply mechanical load to it. You literally use it or lose it in the game of collagen health and tendon health.
Yeah, and I think that anecdotally, I've never seen anyone who had a tendon injury take a break and come back and not just re-injure it almost immediately and end up in the exact same place.
Yeah, and people are just pissed because they'll come back to climbing and it'll hurt right away.
Yep.
And then they're like, my tendon still hurts and I took a month off. I'll say, well, no shit. What did you expect it to happen?
Right. You did the exact wrong thing for your tendon.
You didn't tell it what to do. So it has, and then the brain gets involved with, the last thing you did was load your tendon and it hurts. So your brain remembers that.
Sure.
So you're just not prepared to load it again. Yeah.
So don't be afraid to progressively load your tendons even when they're injured.
Yep.
They're built for load. It's what they want. And, I heard Ebony Rio say something really interesting, and I'm glad she said it, was that she often is looking to bring the pain down just to a tolerable level in high-level athletes, because a lot of them are operating with pain of some sort almost all the time. And if you can just bring it down to their normal level, then they can perform at the level that they want to perform at. So, you know, the top level athletes aren't just always staying perfectly healthy. I don't even like using the word healthy for that, but they're operating with pain quite often.
Yeah.
And continue to perform at a really high level. So
yeah, it's very unrealistic in general for humans to assume, you know, there's some really cool neuroscience books about pain that I was interested in right when I was out of graduate school that talk about, like, until morphine was invented, humans never had the idea what living a life without pain was like.
Oh, sure.
Like back in the old days, man, you hurt or you drank whiskey for it. You know, there's like no option. So they would always use these substances to try and numb it a little bit. But up until, you know, the modern era where we have all these fancy medications, like, it's really unrealistic to assume that you're never going to be sore. And with training, especially high-level athletes, man, you got to push them right up to their level and their limit. And if we're doing that, you're always going to get some soreness, and you're always going to get some tweaks and weird things that are happening. And that's pretty normal, you know? So, like, as a clinician, I spend most of my time, the most valuable thing that I can do for patients is educate them, like, hands down, better than any therapy. Educating them and then finding a way to load them is like pretty much all I do all day, which, you know, going to graduate school, you learn all these crazy things, and I don't really do hardly any of those anymore.
Right.
It's really just like education and loading people, right? It's like rehab 101 for the world.
Yep. Cool. Well, let's make ourselves feel better and eat some donuts and drink some coffee, and we'll be back. What's up, everybody? Chris here. Pardon the interruption. I'll keep this short and sweet. Since this podcast started taking off and we've been growing it, you guys have been asking how you can help out. I've got 3 ways for you. Number 1, you can become a patron. That just means you give a monthly donation to the podcast, $1 and up, and you get something in return. And you can check out what those rewards are at patreon.com/powercompanypodcast. Best of all, we'll keep it sponsor and commercial free for you. Number 2, you can rate us and review us on iTunes. I know it's a pain in the ass to go to iTunes and do all that, but it really helps us out. At least that's what I'm told by the podcast powers that be. And number 3, perhaps the easiest way and the best way to help us out is to share us on your social medias. Anytime you see us post up a new podcast, please share it with your friends. Tag people who will really appreciate it or who need to hear the advice that we're giving. All right. Thank you, guys, and back to the show. All right, we're back. We've eaten some donuts. I've got hot coffee ready to roll.
Eating all the donuts.
Yeah, almost all the donuts are gone at this point because we're fat kids. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can still climb hard in that state.
Yeah, there's definitely nothing wrong with eating donuts. And we're going to do some more probably tomorrow and Saturday.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got a birthday coming up, so it's just going to be birthday donuts for everybody.
Birthday party, donut sponsor, Murphy's Bro.
And I'm hoping that some of the people in the seminar are ashamed and won't eat their donuts, because then that's more for me.
Right.
So,
we'll have to take a poll and see who wants to participate.
So I just wanted to, like, collagen is kind of all the rage now, supplementing with collagen. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about understanding why collagen is important, what its role is really, and then the basics of what the research is saying on collagen and supplementing with it. So what does collagen do in the tendon?
Collagen essentially serves as the building blocks, as long as there's other molecules in and around it, to build healthier tendons and to build more collagen. Okay. So the way that you get that really probably doesn't matter, as long as you're consuming animal products. You know, you're probably getting the necessary molecules to build healthy tendons still. But the supplementation thing comes about from maybe people don't have the right quantities of the individual amino acids that help build them.
We don't eat the, like, chewy parts of steak anymore.
Yeah. People, especially now that the
bone broth isn't.
That the imprint of, like, the animal imprints coming as a big thing right now in the news, to have less of an imprint. So we're consuming less animal products, and that's the best way to get those. So the supplementation stuff is essentially trying to curb that. but the science is very new and very in its infancy. So there definitely is there's some reviews on talking about collagen, but it's mostly animal models, not lots of human models.
Yep. So tell me this about collagen. I don't quite understand it. I haven't tried to really understand it. I know that collagen needs to be told which direction to orient, essentially. Like you load the tendon and the collagen lines up. Is that the right term to use? Lines up in a specific way based on how you load the tendon.
Right.
And if you aren't loading it, this is another reason why loading your tendon is important. The collagen becomes multi-directional and doesn't form as strong a tendon because it's not oriented in the direction of load.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So tendons and ligaments are made of the same material, and the histology classification is dense, regular connective tissue. And the density refers to the actual protein fiber concentration, and then the regular refers to the orientation of those individual fibers.
Okay.
So in comparison, dense irregular connective tissue is still dense in its connective tissue quantity, but the irregularity means that the fibers are going in lots of different directions.
Now, would that be beneficial for somebody for anybody? Like if you're just a general person, not an athlete, is it beneficial to have multi-directional?
No, all tendons and ligaments have dense, regular connective tissue.
Okay.
So the multi-directional, what I was getting at, is like your dermis is made of dense, irregular connective tissue.
Okay.
It's designed to resist tension in lots of directions.
Gotcha.
Where tendons and ligaments are designed biologically to resist tension in one direction.
Right.
And that's why we can get non-contact ACL injuries, someone running down a field and turning their knee. The tendon is designed to resist tension in one direction, but as soon as you add a little rotation and torque to it, it can snap in half, right? So
Yep.
it's very strong in terms of its load tolerance, but with that extra rotation, it can be dangerous. That's potentially why climbing outside is harder, or climbing on a woody is harder than loading at a really high intensity, is because you have that slight rotation in your tendon.
Right, you're loading it in different directions.
You load it with a little bit of torsion to it, and the pulleys as well are important for people to remember. Are made of pretty much the same material. The pulleys are also made of dense, regular connective tissue, and they are perpendicular in their orientation to the tendon of the finger flexors.
Right.
So because people tend to, maybe not think about loading your pulleys for a long, long time as well can also stretch them and break apart the little bonds and make them stronger as well. Again, why kids that, grow up climbing, their pulleys are crazy strong. They can resist more stress than someone that climbs in their 20s can, kind of thing. But yeah, the orientation is really matters in terms of how we load tendons. Because when you get an injury and you get scar tissue, if it's going to scar down eventually, if you don't load it in the way that it's designed to load, it's going to haphazardly lay down.
Sure.
No rhyme or reason how.
Yep.
Which ultimately would make your tendon have less compliance and less capacity, like long term.
Right. And so if the collagen doesn't line up in the direction of load, does that sort of create a weak point in that tendon, or a point at which it is more prone to injury?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
That's why the no loading is not a great idea, because
Right.
you're sitting around, unless you have a grade 2 or 3 pulley injury. It's not common if we're talking about the fingers for climbers to get tendon injuries, but
Right.
pulley
More
injury is
pulley
really
injury.
common. But the whole point of immobilizing something would be so it scars down, because it's really hard to load a pulley with a little bit of load without overloading it, because of the actual physics behind where it lies inside
Right.
the finger. So those become a little more tricky, but that would be the reason to load down a pulley to immobilize it, would be to scar it down to the bone.
Right.
Which would, in that case, would probably be okay. Whereas if it was a tendon, you probably wouldn't want to do that. You would want to keep loading it.
Sure. Now, one thing I've been reading with collagen is that vitamin C is a really important part of the process of building collagen. Do most of us have, I guess this is a tough question to answer, but if we just are supplementing with vitamin C, is that going to help, or do most of us get enough vitamin C generally? What does that look like? Say we're eating lots of animal products. We eat steak, or, we consume bone broth. Then is just general vitamin C supplementation going to be helpful, or maybe not?
Most people probably get, and it's hard to be nutrient deficient in America nowadays, because there's even like breakfast cereals are fortified with like vitamins in them, So
Sure.
in general, the nutrition researchers would say it's really hard to be deficient in America, and probably, the upside of that is if you consume more vitamin C than you need, there's no real downside. You're just going to urinate it out. So it's not really risky in that sense. The argument comes from consuming collagen and vitamin C on an empty stomach has to do with the hydraulic mechanism to get it into your system. So if you get something in your system on an empty stomach and it gets in your circulatory system, the only way your tendons get things in and out of them is by loading them and unloading them and creating this movement of water across the membrane that either pushes
So almost like a
things out or
sponge
sucks
squeezing
back
it in and out.
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
right?
So every time you load your tendons, you push water out, and then when you release, you suck it back in. So the argument for the loading that Barr and those guys did was, 30 minutes before, they showed a greater quantity of these substances in the circulatory system before they loaded the tendon. And so, that's just really anecdotal. That's one of those examples where, who knows, like maybe 10, 15 years from now, we'll have really good human studies on tendon health. But right now, it's kind of like, let's try it and see what happens, right? The downside is not really big. So that's where that idea comes from, though, is being able to suck in the molecules necessary to build stronger tendons, and this, and in the hopes that they will end up in your tendon where you want them, right? But there's no good way to guarantee that's going to happen, I guess is the way to say it.
Yeah. So the protocol you're talking about that Barr and those guys did in their study was something like loading with a collagen supplement and vitamin C 30 minutes or so prior to a really short bout of submaximal effort exercise in that, or loading of that tendon.
Just tendon loading. Just tendon strain. It doesn't have to be high. It just is literally like a warm-up routine almost for your fingers, just pumping water in and out of the tendon. It's pretty simple. And so I think the argument that, if any supplement would do that, and any vitamin C quantity would do that as well. People that I talk to that have injuries, I say, there's not really a lot of downside to doing that as an intervention. It might help you, it might not. Worst case scenario, you spend money that, you didn't need to spend. It's not overly expensive, buying bulk collagen, and vitamin C is obviously not expensive. So, I'm not conclusive in terms of saying this for sure is going to be helpful for people, but I don't think there's really any downside either.
Are there other upsides to doing more frequent?
There's definitely upsides to loading the tendon for sure. And I'm not sure that there's more upsides for the supplementation though necessarily.
Right.
But for the loading, there's great use. It's just more mechanical loading, right? Like high frequency loading is always healthy for your tissues.
Yep. Do you see an upside to doing that type of submaximal loading, that same sort of like short, almost warm-up workout, do it early in the day, do it late in the day, whatever, separate from your normal session? Are there other upsides to that?
For injured people, sure. For non-injured people, probably not as much. Like I have them do those as a warm-up before they climb. I think that makes sense. Because really the whole point of warming up is blood flow and hydration of your tendon. That's the only reason we need to warm up, get the sliding mechanism working. But in general, like and I'm a big fan of doing multiple day types of trainings, but usually my interventions at the other time during the day are of higher intensity or of longer duration.
Sure.
Not warm up intensity necessarily.
Yep. Okay. And I know, or I've heard, and I'm not sure if there's more recent research, and I know this isn't your field of specialty, but have you seen any research yet that compares collagen to just a protein supplement? Because I know that I've heard Keith Barr talk about we don't really know if taking a supplemental collagen, a hydrolyzed collagen or whatever is any better than just taking a normal protein supplement or bone broth or whatever.
Right. No, I don't. That science doesn't really exist that I'm aware of. So most people, I say, consume it. What's the best for you in terms of like its ease?
Yep.
A lot of times it's just like, I've been on a diet restriction for myself, so it's easier for me to just put it in my routine than having to like worry about other types of methods of application. So no, I don't think there's any good argument to suggest that one is better than the other at this point.
Yeah, and I think that is I think you just made a good argument for taking the collagen supplement just because it's easy. Most of us have busy fucking lives, and to be able to give something a real chance, you want to do it consistently.
Yeah.
And maybe the best way to do that is, having the supplement. I do use Gnarly's protein supplements pretty often. And I've thought about maybe I should try the same sort of protocol using orange juice or vitamin C at the same time, and then going to do this little short warm-up type intervention just to experiment with that for a couple of months and see what happens.
Absolutely. I think there's enough science to be of interest for me to where it's certainly worth trying out. And I don't know, again, there's not really a downside. So that's all, what you got to do is try things and see how they respond, and then wait for science to catch up. The researchers, I am so respectful of researchers, because for me, research, I'm so interested in it, but it's so boring to do, and they spend so much time just writing grants and finding money, and it's not that fun, or like they don't get to do all the things with it that we think are so interesting, right? Which is great to have researchers that do all that work for you. So like Bar, that guy is so cool, and like they do such good work that we're excited to see what comes out. But they'll come out with some new stuff, because having healthy tissues is the number one cause of disability in the lower extremity is arthritis in the knee,
right?
And rotator cuffs in the shoulder. So if we can find ways to make our tissues healthier, that's benefits everyone. That's great.
Yeah, and it just means we're going to be able to climb better for longer, and really that's what everybody listening to this right now is interested in. We don't care if we're in wheelchairs and can't walk when we're 65 as long as we can rock climb while we're 50.
People want to try hard, and people want to not be in pain pretty much, and be able to go hang out with their people.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you being willing to just say, the research isn't the end all. Sometimes we need to experiment and try things, and be willing to see what works. I appreciate an evidence informed approach, but I also think that anecdote and just trying things is really, really important, and is a massive part of how people get better and better at sports, So
yeah, absolutely. If there was an answer for anything, everyone would be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Which is not the case at all. There's thousands of ways to get to the same goal, and that's what's so fun about this weekend, these events, is the creativity that, even from the things that I've put on Instagram, people do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. And I'm like, wow, that's actually a really good idea. I've never thought about that. So it's really putting things out for people to be able to practice with and use their own creativity, which is really cool. Yeah.
Well, man, thanks for sharing your psych and motivation for the science and the research, and adding that component in an excited way, because like you said, it can be a really boring thing to think about and to consider and to apply. So thanks for doing that. I think it's helping a lot of climbers, and it's helping a lot of coaches understand better what to do with their, the training that they're prescribing.
Yeah, I'm happy to help for sure. It's good to be on and chat and learn from all these coaches that we get to teach over these courses. So psyched.
Totally cool. Thanks, man.
Cheers.
Big thanks to Tyler for sitting down with me at the Donut Distillery in Nashville. And again, big thanks to them for having us and letting us record in there. It's each coach, each trainer has to take a specific role, a specific stance, a specific path in the way that they train and coach. And while Tyler appears to take a purely scientific approach, it's not always that way. And while we appear to steer clear of that for the most part, it's not always that way. It overlaps quite a bit more than you see on the internet. And I've got Tyler wrote down for me what his general training looks like, the percentages of practice versus projecting versus what you see on Instagram as the isometrics and strength work, and what it looks like in season versus out of season. And I've got that on our blog, and there will be a link to that in your show notes. You can also find it at powercompanyclimbing.com. And I think it'll be really interesting for you to see that it's not 100% about the numbers. There's a lot more to it than that. Tyler had a strong background in strength training and came into this very, very strong already, able to do multiple one-arm pull-ups. And that has helped him immensely. And it's also caused him to spend more time practicing than maybe, the climber who moves really well but isn't as strong is. So again, all of this needs to be put into context and taken with at least a small grain of salt. And regardless, it's radically important, and I'm glad that he's out there doing it. Now, I promised you that there was a winner from our Instagram contest, and that person, I hope you're listening, is Ross Landino. Ross is a USAC youth coach, photographer, adventurer, currently in Golden, Colorado. So, Ross, shoot me an email at powercompanyclimbing@gmail.com, and I will get you connected with Tyler, and we will get all these things sent out to you. So congrats, and thank you guys for making that Instagram contest so exciting. Don't forget to click on those links in your show notes for both Empowered and for the Performance Climbing Coach Seminar. Get signed up for one of those. Further your knowledge. If you are not already following him, you can find Tyler on the Instagrams at C4HP. That's the letter C, number 4, letters H and P, Camp 4 Human Performance. Go follow him. Lots of exciting stuff on there, but keep in mind that you need some context. You can figure that out on your own if you really think about it. You know where to find us, powercompanyclimbing.com. You can find Tyler's general training schedule on there right now as we speak. You can also find us on the Facebooks and the Instagrams at Power Company Climbing, and the Pinterest if you're on there. Lots of cool pins on there. Are pins cool? I don't really know. You can search for us on the Twitters all day, all night, all the way up until that next Performance Climbing Coach Seminar in Ottawa in January. But you're not going to find us there because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time, this time.